Here's the Mishnah. Amar lishnaim. Mishu amar lishnei anashim. Somebody said to two people, Gazalti le'echad mikem mana. Ve'eni yadeh eze mikem. I stole a mana, $100 or 100 zuz from one of you, but I don't remember which one of you it is. Oh, aviv shalachad mikem ifkidli mana, or one of your fathers gave me 100 zuz to watch, but I don't remember which one. If it was your father or your father, notain lazemana or lazemana. The halacha is that me, the person who's not sure, has to give each of you 100, even though I only stole 100, or I was only watching 100, but I have to give each of you 100. Shehodami piatzmo, because I admitted it by myself. The Gemara is going to focus on that line later on. That's cases number 1 and 2. Shnayim shehifidu etzel achad. Two people gave one person something to watch, so there are two owners in one shomer. Zeh mana v'zeh matayim. One gave 100 and one gave 200. They come back from their vacations after a week, and each of them says to the shomer, by the way, the 200 is mine. So they're asking for 200 each, which is a total of 400. He's only holding 300. Notain lezemana or lezemana. He gives each of them 100. And the third 100 has to sit in escrow. Munachat shiavo Eliyahu. It sits in escrow until Eliyahu comes and resolves all the problems in the world, or until Eliyahu comes, until somebody brings proof. So it's like a metaphor. Because if you don't know what to do, you hold it. Amar Rav Yossi, I don't like that idea. Imkain mahifsid haramai. If that's the case, why? What does the cheater lose? In other words, you're not incentivizing the person not to cheat, because if I cheat, I'm going to get my 100 back anyway. So Rav Yossi says, not only does the last 100 sit in escrow until we have a proof, but the whole thing sits in escrow. That's the machloket between Tanakama and Rav Yossi. But both of them agree that the money that's in doubt, that the money that we don't know about, definitely both of them agree, sits ad shiavo Eliyahu. That's case number 3. And case number 4, b'chein shnei kelim. Same thing with two objects. One of them is worth 100 and one of them is worth 1,000. Each person comes and says the expensive one, the $1,000 one is mine. So the difference is, first of all, it's not 100 and 200, but it's 100 and 1,000. And the second difference is it's not money, but it's object. Kelim. You give the small one, the $100 one, to one of them. And from the big one, you give the value of the small one to the second one. So Rashi says you break it. Other people say you sell it. But the bottom line is each of them get 100. And the rest of it gets into escrow again until it's resolved, until Eliyahu comes. Same thing. Amar Rav Yossi. Once again, Rav Yossi disagrees and says the whole thing is in escrow, so we don't incentivize people to cheat. So there are 4 cases in the Mishnah. Cases number 1 and 2 at the beginning, and then the 3 and 4 take longer because the machloket between Tanakama and Rav Yossi. That's the end of the Mishnah, which is part 1. The Gemara is on part 2. Hold on one second, please. And I will just stop the share for a second. And what the Gemara is going to basically do is the Gemara is going to analyze all 4 cases, and the Gemara is going to be divided into 3 parts because we're going to have 3 different contradictions. We're going to have 3 different contradictions in the Gemara. The Gemara is going to raise a contradiction between cases 1 and 3, and then 2 further contradictions, which we'll see in just a moment. Let me call up the Gemara so I can read it for you. Says the Gemara, here we go. Says the Gemara, Alma, 1 second. Here we go. Alma misveka mafkinan mamona, velo amrinan uki mamona b'chaskat mare. We see from the first case that in the case of doubt, you take the money away from him, and you don't say, let the money stand where it is. In the case of that, you actually make him, don't know who to pay them both. And you don't say, let it stand until somebody can prove where it is. Let it just stand where it's sitting right now. Uraminu, that's contradicted by the third case in the Mishnah. Shnayim sheivkidu etzel achad zem mana v'zem atayim zeh omer shali matayim v'zeh omer shali matayim noten lezem mana u'lezem mana v'hashar yehimunach ad sheyavo Eliyahu. That's a whole long quote, but it's all a quote from the Mishnah that we just read. How come in the third case, when you have money that's in doubt, you actually hold it until there's a proof? So in the first case, if you have a doubt, you pay them both and you get rid of the doubt that way. And in the third case, if there's a doubt, you actually hold the money. The Gemara says, that's a silly question. Amale pikado and gezel karamit. You're bringing a contradiction between a case of pikadon and a case of gezel. Gezel da avarisura kansuhu rabanan. Pikadon lo avarisura lo kansuhu rabanan. The case of gezel where the person committed a crime, then he gets punished for committing his crime. In other words, okay, you're a gazlan, so I'm not going to feel badly for you. You're going to have to pay them both. If you don't remember who you stole from, you have to pay extra. Pikadon, the law of Adisura, but the poor shomer who can't remember, he didn't do anything wrong. He was doing me a favor. Therefore, lo kansu rabbanan, he's not punished. So that's the way the Gemara resolves the first contradiction. The contradiction between case 1 and case 3 is an easy one because there's a difference. It's like apples and oranges. In the case of gezel, you do have to pay twice. In the case of pikadon, you don't have to pay twice. Now the Gemara says, okay, now let's do some harder ones. Virami pikadona pikadon, virami gezel gezel. So the Gemara says, I'm going to bring a contradiction between two cases of shomer, and then I'm going to bring a contradiction between two cases of gezel. So let's do one at a time. Pikadona pikadon. Let me go to the next Gemara. Pikadon pikadon. Tikatani reisha. Oh, aviv shalachad mikem ifkidet limana ve'eni yodei ezahu. Notain lazemana ulazemana. The contradiction between pikadon and pikadon is the reisha, which is really the second case of the Mishnah, but it's called the reisha because it's in the first half of the Mishnah, which says, oh, in this case of shomer where you just hold the money that's in doubt, or aminu shnayim sheivkidu v'chule. The Gemara this time doesn't quote the whole case, but the Gemara says, look, case number 3 is also a case of shomer, and yet you hold it. Sorry, I made a mistake. The first case is the case of shomer and you pay them both, right? It's the second case of the Mishnah, and it's a case of shomer and you pay them both. And the third case of the Mishnah is also a case of shomer, and rather you hold the money. So they're both cases of pikadon, and yet in one side, once it says you pay, and once it says you don't pay. Kesef hamutal b'safek. They're both kesef hamutal b'safek, and they're both cases of shomer. Amarava, reisha naasa kimishi yifkidu b'shnei krichot tahavel elamedak. Seifa naasa kimishi yifkidu b'kerach achad telo havel elamedak. The difference is that the reisha, which says you have to pay them both, is like a case of two separate bundles. What do you mean, like two separate bundles? If a person gets two separate bundles, he could be expected to keep them separately. Kal v'chomer, if you only got one bundle from one person, you should know who you got it from. Havel elamedak, you should have checked. So even though it's a case of shomer, you should have been careful. You should have been exacting. You should have been careful. Seifa naasa kimishi yifkidu b'kerach achad telo havel elamedak. The seifa is a case where he only got one bundle, and it's not his fault that he didn't remember who got it from who. Kagon dafkidu tarvayu bahade hadayde chad zimna. Both of them threw it in his face. They both gave it together at the same time. Da'amarlu, he can say to them, Ansku faychu lo kapidu adade. Ana kapidna, you yourselves weren't careful about separating them out so that I wouldn't mess up. You want me to be more careful than you? That's not fair. And now the Gemara says, therefore, it's not just the difference between pikadon and gezel, which was an easy distinction, but even within pikadon, there are distinctions. Sometimes you're responsible, and sometimes you're not responsible. In a case of pikadon, where havel elamedak, where you should have really known because you only got one bundle from one person, then we say it's your responsibility. And in the case of pikadon, where you got the whole thing together, then it's lo havel elamedak, and you don't have to pay. And finally, the Gemara says, "Varami gezel gezel," and there's a contradiction between gezel and between gezel. What do you mean between gezel and gezel? There is only one case of gezel in the Mishnah, so the Gemara is going to bring an outside case of gezel from a different Mishnah. Katani hacha, our Mishnah says the following: Amar l'shnayim gazalti lechad mikem mana ve'eni yodei eze mikem. O aviv shalachad mikem ifkid li mana ve'eni yodei ezehu. Noten lazem mana u'lazem mana. This is the case in the Mishnah that we're familiar with. It says that if you stole, you pay them both. Noten lazem mana u'lazem mana. Here we go. Uraminhu. Another contradiction between an outside Mishnah. The outside Mishnah says the following: Gazal achad michamisha ve'eni yodei eze mehen gazal. Zel meroti gazal v'zel meroti gazal. Meniach gzela beinehem umistalek divrei Rabbi Tarfon. So if there's a case of one person, gazal echad mechamisha, a person was stole from one of 5 people, and we don't know who it is. So instead of saying what we would have guessed, which is, oh, you have to pay all 5, the Mishnah says, actually, you just put it in the middle, and you can leave, according to Rabbi Tarfon. In other words, basically, they have to fight it out, or they have to bring proof, or they have to go to court. But I don't have to pay all 5. So how come our Mishnah, which is the case of Gezel, says I have to pay both? And this Mishnah says you don't have to pay all 5. That's a contradiction. Alma, misveka lo mafkinan mamona v'amrinan uki mamona b'chazkat marei. So we see from here that even in the case of Gezel, when there's a doubt, you don't have to just pay everybody to resolve the doubt, but rather you could just pay once, and you could let somebody else resolve the doubt. So another contradiction. So first the Gemara tries to say like an easy answer. Maybe our Mishnah isn't Rabbi Tarfon. In other words, maybe it's not a contradiction. Maybe it's just an argument. Maybe Rabbi Tarfon disagrees with our Mishnah. And the Gemara says, no way. Because we actually know that the Gemara says over there, the Mishnah says over there that Rabbi Tarfon is aware of our Mishnah and he agrees with it. So Rabbi Tarfon himself says that these are different cases. Now the Gemara wants to know why. What's different about it? There are 2 cases of Gezel. In one case, we say you got to pay them both. And in one case, it says you don't. Gemara gives a new answer. Hatam de katavile, hacha bival atzeit yudei shamayim. The difference is that over there, we're talking about how hatam de katavile, the people are demanding the money from him. And the question is, how much can Beit Din force him to pay? The answer is only once. He only stole 100. He can only be forced to pay 100. Our Mishnah is something else. You have to read our Mishnah carefully. We're talking about a person who's ba latzeit yedei shamayim. He's coming to try to do the right thing. He comes and he says, I stole, and I don't remember who I stole from. What's the right thing to do? You know what the right thing to do is? The right thing to do is to pay them both. The right thing to do is to pay them both, because you don't know. If you want to do tshuva before Yom Kippur, you want to do tshuva, you should pay them both. Right? How much can I force you to pay? I can only force you to pay once. Look at the Mishnah carefully. Our Mishnah doesn't just say, oh, you have to pay them both. Our Mishnah says, you know why you pay them both? Because you're the one admitting it. You're the one trying to resolve the problem. You're the one trying to resolve the problem. Therefore, you have to pay both. So now there's a new response to the contradiction. It's not, oh, every time there's Gezel, you have to pay both. Actually, even in the case of Gezel, you don't have to pay both. You can't be forced to pay more than you stole. If you stole 100, you can't be forced to pay more than 100. The difference is that if you want voluntarily, let's say Yidei Shamayim, then the only way to be Yotze Yidei Shamayim, if I don't know who I stole from, is to pay extra, is to resolve it without beyond the shadow of a doubt. And that's what the Gemara says.